I take education and technical training very seriously. Disaster relief is an area which I have worked on professionally since 2005.
Culinary arts of
Yes.
Balochistan.
This is all about traditional Pakistani culinary traditions. From fish halwa to cactus flower bud curries, sprouted wheat halwa. The purpose was to document the undocumented. We are one of the most polluted cities in the world. We've seen in Islamabad attack on green spaces, our national park, by government officials. Progressively, Pakistan's democracy has become weaker and weaker.
Welcome to Empty Out Loud, Jahan Bas Baat Kar Do. Where the world moves towards modernization and development, we in Pakistan still feel that there is a lot to do, especially when it comes to development work. Today's discussion is from the lens of a social worker and an activist. Let's talk to Nilofer Afridi Qazi. She is public policy specialist. She is an author, activist, a social worker, and a documentary maker. Welcome, Nilofer, to the show.
Thank you so much, Aliya, for inviting me.
Nilofer, you have so many roles in your life, and I think they have been evolving. But I'm sure a part of you was always very curious, very active. and before we start off, where you are today, we'd like to know that what was your childhood like?
That's interesting that you said that. My mother tells me the first word that I ever uttered was why. And I think that was, in some ways, it was a telling. I have been very curious, and I'm blessed that I was in a household which didn't suppress it, and certainly my father he's a man of letters, and he never discouraged curiosity. In fact, perhaps encouraged it as well. And I think in college as well, which was strangely enough, given that we've lived in 13 countries and been very familiar with all sorts of milieus and people and cultures and heritages, but in some ways, you remain protected as long as you are with your parents. So in college was the first time where I was confronted with very bizarre questions about what is Pakistan and, being Muslim, and strange conceptions of both. And I remember one of the term breaks when we visited my parents. I was very upset and, telling my father, they asked me these strange questions, and where do they get these strange ideas about Muslims or Islam? Does it say this? Does it say that? And my father was very amused, and he said, why don't you find out yourself? So I think it was from a very early on, the idea that if something bothers you, find out and figure it out yourself, And I think it's a good foundation, to be strong and resilient and secure about what you think, because you've done the research and you've done the work to back what you believe in.
Right.
Rather than go with the flow or because people think or because it is, not based on your own idea of what the truth is,
I've known you from the days that you were working for the UN Habitat.
Yes.
When did this whole activism and social work really start?
Actually, I think UN Habitat, if you remember, Aliya, I was more field work oriented. I spent 5 to 6 days of the week preferably, like in Patika or Muzaffarabad or, like Mansehra, in all the 8 districts, or was it 9 districts that were affected. So I've slept in the cars, I've slept in moth-eaten, like containers, where the work was required, actually, and Islamabad was really basically where one required the permission or, organized the backup. But the work was always in the field. And 3 years of that gave me a certain kind of exposure to what is required. I mean, if you remember, one of the things that we developed was the non-literate manual for disaster risk reduced housing, but for non-literate women. So we have something that, which is standard operating social mobilization manuals, which a lot of our NGOs and to some extent government partners utilize, but they never factored in that how do you work with non-literate populations, and in particular women who have certain roles in housing reconstruction. Because roles are very gendered. Who brings the water? Who brings the wood? Who participates in manual labor? Which aspects of it? And then explaining the various safe mechanisms, even making the composition of how to make a safe brick, like the very, very minute. And one only realized the requirement and the absence in the existing infrastructure that the donors or the government or the NGOs, they implement in a large scale. But if you spend time in the field, then you realize where the gaps are, And sometimes, even when you point it out to the organizations, the scale for them is not large enough to alter the working infrastructure.
Right. Yes.
And there isn't the level of empathy towards the end raison d'etre of why we are doing what we are doing.
As you said, you had a very challenging journey, and activism and social work is very challenging. People don't see that, as you said, that, even sleeping in areas which are perhaps very difficult for women, and let alone women who are not exposed to a hard life. Do you see the changes that you really thought they would be?
Change comes in so many forms. I was told I was a hard taskmaster,
Yes, you were.
I was not easy to work with. It's a good, but it's a criticism, which I have to, of course, reflect upon. But what makes me happy is that amongst the, like at UN Habitat, I think at one point I must have had 210 staff members who directly or indirectly reported to me. And I have come across dozens and dozens of people who, sadly, I don't even recognize after so many years, but who have benefited and in ways and appreciated the trainings, the enabling, the exposures that I was part of. So that to me is a boon, and it makes me happy. For example, UN Habitat, which is very much part of the UN family, is mandated for all staff members to have access to training at least 2 or 3 per year. But that's just on paper. But I fought for that. And ensured that the staff members that at least report to me had that exposure. And I had to obviously battle that, above my pay grade. So they are battles that you fight if certain things matter to you, and I take education and exposure and technical training very seriously.
Yeah. Tell me about your relief work that you engaged with recently in the climate disaster at Bajor and Swat. I think you were very much hands-on
Yes.
with the relief works as well as with the local administration to help them out. Tell us more about it. This was, you were like the first-hand sort of,
Disaster relief is an area which I have worked on professionally since 2005. So it's sadly something that I am quite familiar with. And when the recent rains and floods and gulfs and the intermingling of both, cloudburst, poverty, horrendous urban planning, overpopulation, I mean the whole combination of all of the above resulted in various forms of displacement and stress and deaths to some extent. The natural first-handers is, of course, government, and then their local partners, etc. So I find, as someone who is now outside of that institutional framework, I choose to go where most don't go. So in Swat, I chose areas where there were deaths, in mountainous areas where one required trekking to access, and no NGOs had gone there, and government hadn't also gone over there. And then also I went to non-Muslim communities just to make sure that, relief and conversations and feedback was available from communities which are integral to the local social infrastructure, which may or may not feed into, the general discourse. So in Swat, I went to the Sikh communities, the Hindu communities, the Christian communities. I attended, mass and, went to all their religious gatherings, spoke to the elders, the women separately, etc. But aside from giving food and, the general relief, I particularly had an agenda. Because for KPK, I have chosen as my social work intervention to look at how to improve health hygiene resilience through the promotion of reusable sanitary pads, which are affordable and should be made widely available to every woman and girl in KPK.
That is a very interesting thing that you're doing on the women's health advocacy. I mean, I'm quite surprised even in this day and age when we're living in this modern world, many communities and many people in these far-flung areas still resort to very unhygienic means of sanitary.
Absolutely. You just need to go and speak to any gynecologist or any health worker, which I did in the government hospitals. They have, they don't even have basic sanitary pads.
So how did this idea came up?
I have adopted 6 villages in Jafrabad, which is a southern district in Balochistan, after the 2022 floods. And through that work, one of the skills that I have initiated for the women in those villages was to be able to make reusable sanitary pads, because I distributed thousands when I was doing relief work in that area. And so when I had decided that I will be rebuilding these specific number of families' lives again, first the house, and the entire infrastructure related to the house. And
Yeah.
every house is owned by the woman.
Yes.
That's how I rebuilt.
Yes.
So the skills that I wanted to provide was their ability to make this.
Sanitary pads are usually made with certain material and
That's
they
right.
require some sort of, bleaching and all those.
So none of that is in the reusable sanitary pad. The average cost is about 30 rupees. It is multiple layers of cotton.
Yes.
And there is one layer of some form of breathable absorbent material. It's stitched in a particular way where it is able to be absorbed and not leak. Even the stitching is cotton. And with washing, drying use, after a certain number of uses, it disintegrates, which is effectively biodegradable, which makes it environmentally friendly.
Yes, this is something really important.
Very important.
When the Dignity kits were distributed,
That's right.
They did not incorporate this particular requirement.
And I have raised this with UNICEF and WHO, UN Women. And so this is the problem with some of the development agencies where projects which they very much funded and trained somehow are not linked into the permanent resilience or sustainable structure when it comes to their own procurement. They become corporate entities rather than poverty alleviation entities.
Right.
And they need reminding that perhaps
Yes.
you need to go beyond the project and ensure for sustainability.
Right.
There needs to be market access and availability in all public sector institutions related to women's health, girls' health. So that would be all the BHUs, public schools, public health facilities, and also all the door-to-door, lady health workers.
That was always such a good idea. Lady health workers, I don't know why they have not been brought back into the system. They were crucial in communication with the communities.
Household.
Yeah. So on your creative side, you have been, well, I know you were a writer, but you've been an author as well, and on a very interesting topic, which is culinary arts of Balochistan.
The book is on the culinary traditions of Balochistan, but my video series, which is on my YouTube channel, Nilofer's Corner, it covers all 4 provinces and what is called the northern areas, or GB, as well.
Are you a good cook? Is that an inspiration, or you were looking for a good cook?
Well, I enjoy cooking, but this is all about traditional Pakistani culinary traditions. And actually, the purpose was to document the undocumented. So these aren't recipes which you can find in restaurants or in small dhabas, as we say, or these are those recipes which are representative of those areas for a variety of reasons, but are not available in the public space. And you would imagine there would be a handful of them, but I would say they are the majority of our recipes. From fish halwa to cactus, flower bud curries, sprouted wheat halwa.
Very indigenous.
They are completely and utterly of the soil. So they are truly what is Pakistani food.
And that's what's disappearing, I think.
It doesn't exist in the public imagination.
We've standardized even the biryani masala. And
correct.
The length and the breadth of the country uses the same biryani masala. Now we don't have a different taste of whether it's a Sindhi biryani or it's in a Hyderabadi biryani. It's the same biryani.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's not the reality, of course, on ground.
So when you were doing these odysseys, I'm sure this is a big part of soft diplomacy. and having lived in so many countries yourself, and I think you are very firmly grounded into your identity, mashallah. It's good to see that. What did you see? I mean, did you see a fragmented sort of Pakistan? How did you feel that you went to Balochistan, you went to KP, and I know you were involved in many places, even in Punjab. What did you see? Is it something that...
I think the everyday toil of the average Pakistani really does not factor in to what we in the four cities that constitutes the imagination of Pakistan. So there isn't really the symbiotic connection that should be. They are busy with daily life and struggles, you know, from food, transport, you know, like livelihoods, safety, security, and all the stresses of health challenges and housing challenges, or, you know, life. And the conversations or the preoccupations of, you know, the public narrative in the center doesn't really factor into what actually is the concerns of the majority of Pakistanis. That is what I saw. So it's not about fragmentation, it's just the voice of Pakistanis isn't in the discourse of Pakistan.
I've been reading your recent blogs, and I think you and I chatted on urban planning and the various forms of crisis that we face in the urban cities like Islamabad.
Yes.
And I think what you point out is not bad planning, is just a governance failure. Where do you see urban cities heading towards in such crisis mode?
Planning is, of course, very, very key. The importance of having democracy is not rhetoric. Democracy is important because the value and the input and the needs of the demos is the priority of planning. That's why democracy. When you don't have democracy, then your governance model is not prioritized towards the needs of the demos. It makes sense, right?
Yes, of course.
I mean, that's why it's important.
Yes.
Islamabad, we are blessed that it is one of the few cities left in this vast, beautiful land that is livable. But in the last 3 years, Aliya, as you know, I mean, I have developed allergies to the extent that, you know, like no spray, no medicine, no medical bills, which I can afford, can overcome, because we are one of the most polluted cities in the world, in spite of the greenery and the protected Margalla hills, because of the overpopulation, the culling of very key trees, bad planning, and the continued policies of denuding our green spaces, and rather than also enhancing environmentally friendly practices to use, you know, to improve clean air, to improve public transportation, green public transportation, reduce emissions, removing plastic, using renewable energy sources instead of, you know, adding pollutants and using, you know, diesel and petrol, and the quality of petrol that is used in Pakistan. You know, it's a whole combination of things, aside from, of course, overpopulation. And Islamabad has, as you know, hosted a lot of people who have ran from conflict, from two sides, both from Sindh and from KP
Yes.
and elsewhere, aside from the international refugees.
And somebody asked me, are you from Islamabad? I said, nobody's from Islamabad.
Well, that's technically inaccurate. Islamabad, we are sitting on formerly 72 villages.
Yes.
14 villages were removed, so to speak, and displaced to create this beautiful city. So, but you do have some residents who predate the 1950s, when Islamabad started, before it was made. Some of the neighborhoods, Saidpur is one of them, Bari Imam, Golra, these are all part of the 72 villages that used to be of this area, So Islamabad has a culture, it has a history. It did not start in the 1960s. We tend to erase our own history.
Yes.
And are very selective to include where our history begins, I tend to go back.
In a way, I support that we need infrastructure, and being a capital city, we need the kind of infrastructure that portrays a very good image when dignitaries come to Pakistan and all. But initially, Islamabad was more on a flat surface, growing that way, and now we see vertical construction going on as well. And we saw that in other cities like Karachi, and what disasters took place when it came to the amenity systems and all of that. Still not sure if Islamabad will be able to cater for all these vertical buildings. But what concerns, I think, most residents is that we keep on extending the suburbs. And it's okay to extend for residential purposes, but extending and having these beautiful agricultural lands turned into big mansions and large mansions, I would say. Farmhouse is a great term we use in Islamabad and you're familiar with. So in a way, each tree counts when you cut down a tree, and you're making roads, and so many hundreds and thousands of trees have been recently cut down. What do you think, should be the action of the citizens?
Let me go back a little bit from what you were saying. We don't plan for low-income housing. When the majority of our citizens are working class, low-income workers who require rental or even the ability to purchase. That is completely and utterly absent in our planning.
So that's a problem with the planning.
Massive.
Yes.
And it also shows how we disregard citizens' requirement in prioritization of public funds. In fact, we do the opposite. In Islamabad recently, and this is not the first time, but we have razed to the ground what we call Kachi Abadis, both in Bari Imam, in the Golra Sharif area, in the G5 area, where all your workers who feed government offices, all your shops, household staff, where do they live? They live in these areas. And instead of building affordable housing near to where their workplaces are, over like decades, these were run by informal, if I am diplomatic, systems where they paid for electricity and water, sewerage, but it didn't feed into the public exchequer, if you know what I mean.
How to hold, planning departments accountable for such actions?
That's a complicated one. It's simple and yet complicated. Sadly, progressively, Pakistan's democracy has become weaker and weaker. And the link between our public representatives and the citizens, that social contract has really frayed over the years. And now we have systematically almost broken down that social contract with disabling the courts with the 26th and the 27th Amendment by effectively an illegal parliament as well. So, one bad action, whether it's a rigged election, then a weak parliament, then which does not have representatives from the minorities or women who were effectively nominated or elected by the correct political parties that were representatives of the people, then the policy making in those very parliament prioritizing issues which aren't the issues of the people. So there's a trickle-down effect, on public officials paying attention to civil unrest. So we've seen in Islamabad the constant attack on green spaces, our national park, our green habitat, by government officials. Instead of the Ministry of Environment, CDA, protecting, our green spaces, it has been left to civil society, individuals, and a handful of collective people to raise awareness and say, no, we will not allow you to chop trees. We will not allow you to build restaurants in a national park. We will not allow you to kill wild animals, which are part of our ecosystem, which provides protection of our environment, which you may or may not choose to accept. Or we do not want to look like a cemented, polluted city, which somehow you imagine is your nirvana. But Islamabadis like their green spaces. We want our parks. We want to hike. We want to be able to walk. As a child, we walked from sector to sector.
Yes.
Through parks and tons of trees. I remember streams and bathing in, waterfalls in Islamabad. That's my Islamabad. And that's the Islamabad of those who have lived here. So you can bring CDA chairmen, you can bring ministers of environment, you can bring parliamentary committees of environment who have absolutely no interest in all of the above. But we Islamabadis will not allow it.
We will continue to live here.
Correct.
And
we will defend what we consider to be precious.
Absolutely. You're so right that, some of these abadis, the Kachi abadis surrounding the large metropolis like Islamabad, and even in other cities, we see that, not only just Kachi abadis, non-modernized sort of buildings, local grocery shop, perchun, what we call perchun, and not a mall sort of a setting of a grocery shop. They all provide opportunities of self-employment and sustenance of economy. Whereas I think cities like Islamabad, we're facing that. Our local markets are being shut down because even in our local market, where we were supposed to buy our, milk and bread and eggs, that's how it was actually planned, that every sector should have that local market so that you don't have to go out very far.
And schools and parks.
Yes.
And, like your dispensary and a library. You see, the original master plan of Islamabad has altered so many times without the consent and discussion of the residents. And every time it is raised, through civil action, through courts. You will have CDA and planning and come and, be disingenuous about their engagement with stakeholders.
Especially the civil society, especially the residents.
No stakeholder in Islamabad will say, yes, we would like to commit environmental harakiri. I mean, what kind of stakeholders are you communicating with, you know?
Yeah.
And so they think by ticking the box, by having 3 conferences, you know, behind closed doors gives them legitimacy. But I'm sorry, we do not accept, you know, this kind of governance, you know, and we continue to struggle for that.
Thank you so much, Nilofer. It was a great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Aliya, for inviting me.